So we are here at Mobey Forum's Vienna member meeting, talking about making digital banking smart, personalized and human. We're hosted by Raiffeisen Bank International in this beautiful National Library in Austria, and we're really enjoying this historic setting.
Welcome to Fintech Daydreaming, the podcast that dives into the world of banking technologies and the ever-changing landscape of fintech companies. We bring you real-life examples from global and local thought leaders, as well as experts working within the financial industry, and seek out the best stories from the front lines of financial services innovation, where dreams of industry pioneers meet reality. Hosted by Paul Krogdahl and Ville Sontu. This is Fintech Daydreaming.
Hey everybody, this is really cool, right? A live episode of the podcast, Fintech Daydreaming. And to everybody out there that are not here today, you're missing out. Mobey Forum is the place to be, particularly because we're here, right?
Absolutely.
It's because we are here. I am Paul Krogdahl, as always. Don't think I'm ever going to change my name. I like it, and people pronounce it wrong all the time, but, you know, Norwegian father, that's what happens. But I couldn't do this podcast on my own, just like you always keep saying, Villa. We need our wingmen to do this. So with me, I've got Villa. How are you?
I'm good. Like you said, Mobey Forum is one of my many families around the world in the fintech space, and I really enjoy every time I meet the Mobey family, and I'm really happy to do the podcast here as well for the first time live. It's actually fun to stare at people's real faces instead of watching you on the screen like I usually do.
Actually, I'll agree with that. It's much better to see other people's faces than mine.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's not. You know. But then I need to complain a little bit about your influence. The last 2 days has been very alcoholic. So I'm sorry. Please, no more of that. But Superapps. I think we should talk about Superapps today.
Yes.
Right? And I'm actually wondering whether there is a fundamental difference in dynamic between Superapps in the Western world versus the Eastern world, and whether there's possibly a difference in how those Superapps have been developed, whether they've come top down, bottom up. What do you think?
Yes, and first of all, the first word that comes to mind is actually flashback or déjà vu about these Superapps, because I mean, now I'm going to reveal my age, of course, but do you remember iMode? This was started in 1999 in Japan.
I would like to say you were born before me, so therefore I don't, but actually I'm older than you, so yes.
Yeah, there we go. So iMode launched in Japan in 1999. It became really the first smart application or smart ecosystem on mobile, so it was really, really ahead of its time. So this was time when we still had like black and white WAP phones, figuring out how to do basic black and white stuff on there. They had colorful applications, they were able to read news, internet access, everything on iMode. It came to Europe a couple of years later, completely failed. Couldn't get it up and running. It was technically superior. It was a live ecosystem, but the Europeans and the Americans, it never took off anywhere else. And now today, iMode is still in existence in Japan, but it's in decline. So the question is it going to be the same with Superapps? With Superapps that are so successful in Asia, can they replicate those? Can these Superapp models be replicated outside the Eastern markets?
But I think there is a fundamental difference. If you look at a lot of the Superapps that have been successful in Asia Pacific, I mean, everybody uses WeChat as a great example. WeChat started off predominantly as an ecosystem to enrich, the experience for the users, but then subsequently started plugging in payments capabilities to be able to stop the users from leaving the platform completely. I think if we look at majority of Superapps that are growing up here in Europe, they seem to be predominantly starting as banking apps. Revolut is a great example, then saying, actually, we need to do more, because if we're only just delivering basic banking capabilities, customers are going to leave. So let's bundle in other things and create a Superapp. But I think that's more of a sort of bottom-up rather than top-down, and I think there is a fundamental difference there.
Yeah, I mean, the Asian kind of examples that we mentioned here, they had bootstrapped user communities already. So WeChat was a massive social media platform. Alibaba, obviously, the largest e-commerce platform in China. So they had already these communities and user bases, and then they added banking and financial services. If we look at the Western examples that are trying to achieve the same thing, like Meta did Facebook, and with the Libra, tried to do that on a global
but failing.
scale. but then failed miserably. So again, the question becomes, why aren't these massive user bases able to be super apps in the Western economies?
No, but it's easy. We're talking about China. It's the government. They've
course.
put it all in place to harvest the data. It's controlled, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. It's the Chinese government, right? Forcing the people.
So you're saying it's a Chinese conspiracy?
Absolutely, absolutely. But you know what? I think we've got a perfect guest to take this discussion. Not so much about the Chinese government, but maybe about the super apps over in Asia Pacific. So I mean, we'd like Alessio to join us. Please come and join us, because without you, this podcast would be really useless.
Thank you.
Right. So Alessio,
Nice to be here.
fantastic to have you here with us.
Yeah.
Yes,
Hey.
and live,
Hey, Ville.
face to face. So used to this, like you said, on Zoom. It's boring. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us who you are, where you've come from, where you're heading, but most importantly, what's your superpower?
Wow, that's a lot of big questions. I'm Alessio, based out of Singapore. Spent the past 10, 11 years of my life in Hong Kong. I'm Italian. I've been doing software for banks for pretty much my whole career. The funny thing, though, is that I never actually worked in Italy. So I did all sort of stuff. I did lending origination for a bank in Czech Republic, in Dublin. I've done teller applications for a bank in South Africa. I've done call centers for a bank in Mexico. And then I ended up in Asia. In Asia, I was in Hong Kong for a while. Did a startup, failed because we ran out of money, as startups normally do. And then I joined a big bank, where I got all the payment experience, then Apple Pay, Samsung Pay. And for the past 3 years, which was very relevant to what you said, I was the CTO of PayMe. PayMe is a wallet which we started in Hong Kong from HSBC because WeChat and Alipay at the time got a license to offer financial services in Hong Kong. And HSBC was the biggest bank in Hong Kong, so we didn't want to lose the market. And they basically gave us a bunch of money, and they say, well, figure out something to keep the users with us. So we created this digital wallet, and it grew to become the biggest one. It's still the biggest one in Hong Kong. And yeah, it's been a big success. And after 3 years of living that life and focusing on one product and living and breathing only one product every day, I decided to trade off depth for breadth. And I joined Amazon Web Services as a principal architect. And now I work with the super apps, the unicorns in Southeast Asia. And yeah, there's a lot of interesting opportunities to make a difference in all the Southeast Asia markets, working with them.
It sounds like you're the perfect guest to have here to talk about the super apps and what's happening in Asia Pacific and everything else. I mean, I'm just wondering, if we start off, what's been the significance of the super apps in Asia Pacific? Why have they been so successful?
So there are different opinions on why they are. I think that the key thing that these apps have been able to execute very well is take a very recurrent use case and just center on that execution use case. For the ride-hailing, like Grab and Gojek, it was ride-hailing and transport. For others, it was e-commerce. So they were executing very, very well on that particular use case, and then they were just following what the users were asking for. So you have to take into consideration that while in Europe, maybe it's very common for a bank to be the place where you go when you have to do things that are related to financial services, or like a particular e-commerce website when you have to shop. In Asia Pacific, people don't have this kind of loyalties, and typically they seek for convenience. Just to give you an example, in the Philippines, which is a market which has hundreds of millions of potential customers and a lot of different islands, sometimes people need to travel 1 or 2 days to get to the nearest branch, right? So if you ask them, do you want to use a bank to take a loan, or do you want to be paid in using a check, so you have to go and cash it? Of course they say no, right? So it is very convenient for these apps to go and reach the customer with the service they need where they are. So a person in the Philippines needs to decide, do I take a loan from an app that doesn't have like a brand that I can associate with financial services? Or do I take a loan with a bank that I know it's a bank, it's got money, it's been there for 100 years, but I have to travel 2 days back and forth out of my island every time I need to do something about that? And well, what would you choose?
One of the discussions we're having here at Mobey Forum, even in this meeting quite a bit, is what is the connection between a super app and a wallet? Now we have actually talked about these super apps like automatically assuming that it has payments capabilities, it has a wallet capability in it. But let's dig into this a little bit. So does a super app need a wallet, or and is a super app actually a wallet, and can wallet become a super app? I mean, what is your thinking around the dynamics of these two concepts that we talk about a lot here?
So I want to make an observation first, is that a lot of the apps that I'm talking about, e-commerce super apps, or ride-hailing super apps, or enterprise super apps, they all have a wallet as a payment capability and the possibility of do things that are related to financial service, right? Funny thing, I was checking yesterday, all this wallet capability used to be front and center on the UI when you open. So when you open things like Shopee, Lazada, there used to be a big button that says Shopee Pay, Lazada Wallet. Now this has been removed. So if you open the apps, you don't see Pay right there on the homepage. It's a feature, it's available. You go to setting or profile, and it's there with all your cards, your coupons, your payment methods, but it's not front and center, right? So the idea is that it used to be like a proposition in itself. Now people realize that customers are not looking for a wallet, they're looking for things that they can do with the app, and the wallet is just something that's there to facilitate that.
Yeah, you might be breaking the hearts of all the bankers in this room when saying that payments and financial services are falling to the background.
I think the bankers knew already, because we were talking about this a 2012 report from Mobey Forum, and if you look at the classification and the functionalities that they were indicating for mobile wallets, it's a super app. We were just calling it mobile wallets. So probably the bankers in this room already knew it, and they just didn't know it.
But I think there's a critical element in that, and part to what we said at the beginning. There's no real stickiness or value in a wallet, right? It serves a fairly small, simplistic use case, which is I need to pay, or I want to transfer money, or whatever. But when we look at super apps, it is really about that holistic user experience. It's about the stickiness. It's about the being there for the user's life, right? And as you said, it might have been very interesting at the beginning when it was new to say, oh, look, here's a button you can pay. But it's unconscious these days. We don't consciously want to do banking. We want it to be as simple as possible. We want it to be hidden. We want it to be, it just happens, right? We talk about the Uber app, but I think we use WeChat as an example very often from Asia Pacific, but it's so much more. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is everything in one place.
It's the same thing that people were saying this morning, that the real point is creating an ecosystem around the functionalities that the product that you're offering. And if you're able to create this ecosystem, then you are successful. At the super apps, we're able to create this ecosystem starting from an anchor use case. Will the bank be able to create this ecosystem starting from something else? I don't know. I think that there are two things that are a prerequisite to do that. The first one is that banks need to be willing to make use of the data that they collect, but also of data that other parties collect. Yep. One thing that struck me during today's discussion is that will a bank be comfortable in making a loan decision with data or features that are created by another company, a third-party company, right? So that's the first thing. And the second thing is a loan, like a car loan that a bank typically provide. Is that the right product to offer at the checkout? Do I really want to go through an instant underwriting, providing a lot of details about myself to the bank in order for the bank to make the decision? Or would I expect that the bank make the decision based on, I don't know, my history of taking taxis on Grab, Grab knows if I use the taxi sporadically, if I use the taxi to commute every day to work, so they have an idea about my repayment ability, my disposable income. So will bank change the way they manufacture products to make loan decision based on data that comes from somebody else, or just outsource this entirely? I don't know, but...
Interesting question there as to whether in the future that bank that's supplying that loan to that platform, how much decision power will they actually have? I mean, if you take Amazon as an example, Amazon will give preferential loans to small vendors that are using Amazon as their main commerce platform. Now, Amazon can give very good rates because they have that full data set, but they won't share that with the underlying bank, right?
But the bank should trust that.
The bank has to trust.
Exactly.
It becomes a very interesting dynamic, right?
There's another example which is related to insurance. Now, we haven't spoke about insurance here, but there is an online travel agency in Indonesia. They sell bus tickets, flight tickets, hotel experiences, and the like, right? And of course, they propose insurance. But if they have to propose insurance for a particular trip, then of course, they need to make an API call, and the insurance company needs to underwrite that particular trip, right? And it gets complicated. They want a lot of data, and then sometimes the online travel platform doesn't have all this data, right? So what they do is that they sell you insurance, but what they actually sell you is an insurance concierge service. So they're not selling the customer an insurance policy. They're selling the customers a service that if you have any travel issue, okay, you call them and they will arrange rebooking, they will refund you, they pay you back money, and so on and so forth. So it works like an insurance, but it's not actually an insurance contract. It's like part of a service, and the whole portfolio of such contracts, this online travel agency sell to a real insurance. So the insurance is actually underwriting a portfolio of 10,000 such services, and this service to the customer feels like an insurance, but technically speaking, it's not an insurance, right? So will banks be able to rework the way they sell products to make things that look like a loan to the end user, but it's not like a classic loan?
I think you're being too kind. You're saying, will banks be able to? I think banks have to, right? Being very blunt about this, I think we're getting to a point where it's no longer a point for banks to decide if they're going to do A or B. They must do something.
But coming back to this data sharing point, I mean, we're already seeing banks in places like Africa and, of course, in China, Asia, Southeast Asia, Pacific in general. They are taking external data in for the risk process for deciding upon a loan disbursement, basically. But we're seeing less of that in Europe and even North America to a certain extent. What do you think are the kind of characteristics of these Chinese and Asian environments where these super app ecosystems actually are able to aggregate data and then share that with the financial institutions in order to actually give out the loan? Do you think there's something unique in those relationships, or is there something just stopping things here in Europe?
I'm not really familiar with the situation in Europe. What I can see from customers that we work with, and I'm going to mention a couple of them later, is that you need to be able to prove that the type of decisioning, the type of data you're providing is actually effective, right? So I have a couple of customers that collect data from app networks. So they don't collect your identity, but they associate features to a profile that they create based on your device, right? So you have a gambling app on the device, you're a gambler. You use a video game every day between 7 to 8 a.m. So you are commuting and you're playing video games, right? So they say you're a gamer, you are a gambler, and all these things, right? And then they go to customers, to banks, to non-banks, payday lenders, and so on and so forth, and they tell, well, we have a set of features that we think are indicative of repayment ability or repayment intention, and this is our data set. This is a sample of data set from other customers, and they are very open to say, well, you can verify if you want that these features are actually representative of non-performing or performing loans, right? So again, does a bank has the capability to sit at the table and verify this data? How does that work? Like, I think that as part of the due diligence, when a bank has to purchase these things, they need to have this capability. But typically, the part of the bank that does this due diligence is the IT side, when they have to purchase like an API or a system, right?
We've gone a little bit off tangent, but that's nothing new in our podcast. We always tend to go off tangent and end up somewhere completely down in a rabbit hole we never expected to go. So I want to come back onto the super apps.
Sir.
Right? And right at the beginning, we were discussing that is there a fundamental difference in premise for super apps between the Western world and the Eastern world? And can you see that? Can you actually see that most of the successful super apps in Asia Pacific have come from a different foundational starting point and therefore been successful versus what's happening here in Europe or in the US?
Mm-hmm. So what we see is that super app seems to be southern part of the world phenomenon, Latin America, Central America, Africa, Asia, Southeast Asia. It could be that simply some services are not so accessible for normal people. So piling up financial services around the ride-hailing app is a good proposition because people will not have access to those services otherwise. And I think that there is a willingness to experience with and experiment with ecosystems, to be honest. Because somebody said before that it's very difficult to acquire a new customer. Well, these people have millions, these apps have millions of users, right? So it's a win-win proposition if you just piggyback on them and start offering other services. So I don't know if this is like the actual reason, but I definitely confirm what you said, and this is the same thing that we see. It seems to be like a south of the world phenomenon, if I can use that word. So Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia, versus like Europe or North America.
So there's a different dimension on that. Could it be that we're saying that emerging markets are more amenable to super apps? Because when we say, south of the border, Latin America, India, to a certain degree, we could also say they're emerging markets.
Okay.
Right? They are maybe not as digitally native to a certain degree as Europe and the Nordics, and therefore maybe as citizens, they're more open to taking on these new ways of interacting, experimenting, like you were saying.
That could, so on the customer side, that could be definitely. I won't say they're less digitally native; they're probably more digitally native because they leapfrog the whole,
good point.
analog part.
Yeah.
I think that there's also an aspect on the providers of these super apps. Like so far, we only saw VC-funded unicorns. But more and more we see big enterprise and conglomerates creating their own super apps.
Yes.
Right? So conglomerates tend to be still emerging market phenomenon. So if you have like a big group that has a business in a lot of different verticals, you have advantages in aggregating them together and offering your services, right? So you can have that critical mass of daily usage that we said before is the key part for a super app.
I've got one more question. I'll let Villa step in before I take over everything here. But we've spoken an awful lot about embedded finance here. Do you see super apps as being a good channel for banks to push embedded capabilities?
Before I go there, can I tell you one? So I have a feeling that everybody's trying to understand which ecosystem a bank needs to partnership with to push their products as API, of course, right? There is another option, which is the bank creates that ecosystem. An example is a bank, which is a major bank in Thailand. Okay, what do they launch during COVID? They launch a food delivery business. Okay, so they have an app that you can use to order food from restaurants, and they launch it as a social product. They basically waive the fee and they enable the growth of this digital ecosystem. But by doing that, they have acquired, so to speak, thousands and thousands of small restaurants. Okay, and they provided these small restaurants with digital payments software, digital payment methods through the bank. Okay, and now they start providing working business loans to them, right? So what seems like an outrageous idea, as a bank, you develop a food delivery app completely out of a remit of a bank, turned out to be a very, very clever way of doing customer acquisitions. And the small business customer acquisitions that we saw are very valuable. Somebody said they are the future, right, for banks and embedded finance. So before going to the other questions about embedded finance, I want to say that sometimes this outrageous idea are things that should be entertained. Because in some countries you have these apps that already have the ecosystem. Sometimes you don't. So maybe there is a niche for a bank to make that kind of investment and create the ecosystem.
I mean, you work an awful lot with emerging markets, specifically around wallets. What's your view?
The consensus view in the emerging markets where I work, mostly Africa, Middle East, certain markets there at least, the consensus is that Superapps is the next stage that these typically mobile money providers just absolutely have to take. And it has a lot to do with the fact that, especially in Africa, the telecom operators are the ones who are providing the mobile money services for the underbanked segments of these societies. It is a huge amount of people. It's hundreds of millions of people are relying on telcos to provide the day-to-day banking services. They started off from a very simple application. Again, it was basically just a simple cash in, cash out, money transfer, airtime top-up type of things on a USD basic phone. But now, as we're seeing smartphones becoming more mainstream also in these developing economies, the apps that used to be simple mobile money apps are now transforming into real super apps. I think we all know the most famous mobile money example, which is M-Pesa in Kenya. And they have very clearly said that they will become a super app ecosystem, which to a large extent they already are. And if you scratch the surface and look at the history of how did M-Pesa and all the mobile money systems end up in this place, it is just a logical continuum of what they've been doing for a long time already. We have, the company that I work for, we have integrated more than 3,000 different service providers in the emerging markets over open APIs to these mobile money systems. So it's just logical that this super app is like a new visual representation of that already very vibrant ecosystem.
Yeah.
And it has all the elements, like you mentioned. It has the data sharing element, there's the identity layer, there's the payment capabilities, and the data can be shared with, for example, financial service providers in order for them to make smarter risk decisions on lending, for example.
Yep.
So yeah, it's a fascinating kind of parallels happening here. And I always come back to the question where we started, is that why don't we see this in our home markets, here in Europe or North America, for example? It's happening to much less extent. Is it just about regulation? And I don't want to make this conversation about regulation too much, even though it's my passion.
No, you always do. You want to go down there. You're Mr. Regulator man.
Yeah, it's still the small banker still living inside me that wants to talk about regulation. But yeah, so the regulation seems to be, of course, evolving here in these markets as well, and it's interesting to see whether the likes of open finance will actually open up these super app opportunities here as well.
I'm sorry to say this so quickly, but we are rapidly running out of time. We always say that time flies when you're having fun, and this time we've got a slightly shorter time allowance than we normally have. But there's two things that I'd like to sort of cover off at the end. What is the next big thing that the users in Asia are expecting from these super apps?
So there are a few things that these apps are working on these days. One important thing is personalized services that they provide to merchants to grow their business. So I mentioned the idea that they look at your transactions and they can decide if I can lend you this much money as a business, right? But the idea is that they provide to the merchant much more. They provide to the merchants recommendation of how they should grow the business. What you should do to increase the number of intakes that you have by this much, by opening an hour early or providing particular type of products. So in a way, it's not just a service that they provide and they say, well, the merchant is on its own and decide what to do with this money and grow the business. But they give you that kind of advice that somebody was saying was really critical service that banks provide, right? So if they can do it, they can do it at scale with, automating the process. then definitely the banks should follow, right? Because the conversation that you have with a banker, sometimes just a couple of nudges or notifications or a recommendation that you have on your merchant portal that you open every day when you see how your business is going, it's as effective, right? So this is one thing, definitely. The second thing is there's a bunch of pilots going on in Southeast Asia on two things. First, on connecting networks of super apps that are very prominent in different countries. And most of them, to be honest, the connection is about payments. So they want to enable P2P payment and merchant payments cross-country. So you are Paul, and you have your wallet that you have in Finland, and then you travel to Germany, and you can scan QR codes at shops and pay with your Finnish wallet, and all the settlement is managed by them, right? So the idea is that if you don't have a regional super app that can give you this coverage, at least you can partner with your peers in all the other countries and create this regional coverage. That's fantastic. The same idea that Visa got it up.
So Alessio, we are running out of time. I'm really sorry. But is there anything that you feel that we've missed very quickly that you would have liked to have shared?
I would have really wanted to talk about data and data sharing, and not from the regulatory perspective. Vienna was really fearing so much, but in terms of possibilities, right? What can be done, what a bank would like to do to provide a service that customers want, and then figure out if this is actually possible, how to make it possible with the current regulatory landscape that you have.
Sounds like we need to get you back for another episode.
Let's have.
Now, as we close out the episode, one of the things that we always like to do to lighten the mood and leave on a high note is we ask our guests to share a joke. So do you want to share a joke with everybody quickly?
Do you want really to?
Oh yes, we need a bad good joke. Yes.
It's a crypto joke.
Go for it. They're the best.
Okay. How do I make $1,000 in crypto?
Don't know. How do you make $1,000?
By investing $2,000 in crypto.
Well, there you've got it. Thank you very much. Excellent. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you for joining us. If people want to talk to you more about Superapps in Asia Pacific, how can they reach you?
They can look me up on LinkedIn or write me an email, alesbas@amazon.com.
Sounds perfect. And for Villa and I, you can find us on every social channel that's out there except for WeChat. And TikTok. Yes. Another great experience here. It's been wonderful to have this with a live audience. We would love to do more of these. So please go back to your home corporate worlds and say, we know these two cool guys that will come and do a great session for our next corporate event, and Villa and I will gladly come and do it for you. Also, to the rest of the guys out there that are attending this not live, thank you for joining us. This has been another fantastic episode of Fintech Daydreaming.
This is Fintech Daydreaming.